All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to TRL Wisconsin virtual events. We have a great session planned for you tonight. We are glad that you can join us. My name is Jeanette Russell. I am the Reading League board member here in Wisconsin. And we just want to say thank you to our presenters for joining us tonight. I'm going to start with introducing our presenters and reading their bio, and then we're just going to get started. So we have Erica Zanzarella, has a bachelor's in childhood education and a master's in special education from Manhattan College. She is certified in New York State and by the International Multisensory Structured Language Education Council. Erica taught in the New York City Public Schools as a special education teacher for 3 years. She then worked at the Windward School, an independent school for children with language-based learning disabilities, for 7 years. There, she was introduced to the PAF reading program. Erica joined the PAF team in 2023. Erica, if you can just wave for us really quick so we know who you are.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us, Jeanette.
Next, I want to introduce Magdalena Zavalia. She is the CEO of the PAF reading program and founder and CEO of Aprendo Leyendo. As a parent, she became deeply familiar with the current crisis in literacy education and made it her personal mission to help bring change to the way reading is taught in schools. Before her work in education, Magdalena practiced law at Latham and Witkins LLP. She graduated from the Universidad Católica Argentina Law School in Buenos Aires and has an LL Master of Laws from Columbia University. She is admitted to practice in Buenos Aires and New York. Magdalena is also founder and CEO of Aprendo Leyendo and serves on the board at the Windward School, the Achilles and Bodman Foundation, and the Winning Foundation. She is a member of the Haskins Global Literacy Hub. Magdalena is looking forward to connecting with the Reading League Wisconsin today to discuss multilingual learners in the classroom.
Well, thank you, Jeanette, for having us. And sorry for the mouthful that my bio is. I am originally from Argentina, where I studied law there. And as Jeanette mentioned, I moved into working in literacy because of my children. When they were in elementary school early on, I just changed careers completely. So I come to you all from the experience from the trenches, first as a parent at the kitchen table, and then leading the teams of PAF and Aprendo Leyendo, and I'm delighted to be here. So Erica and I are going to share a little bit of how, what does the research say? And I'm going to share my screen first. And then I'm hopefully everybody's seeing my screen right now. Yeah. And now I am going to say, yes, it's being recorded. So the goal tonight is the following. We want to tell you a little bit about the research on how to best teach reading to multilingual learners or English language learners. We are going to keep that part short. We're going to share with you some resources that I think would be very helpful. And when you have a lot of free time, which I'm sure you all do, you can listen to them or watch those recordings. And then we are going to briefly show you how those practices that those reading research recommends are the most effective to teach English learners and to support them translate into the classroom. Because we find that bridge of the research to the classroom is what's hardest. And so that's a big focus of what we want to share today. And then the last thing we want to share is in programs that are dual immersion or transitional bilingual, where you have the luxury to teach students to read in their native language, how those skills taught in the native language transfer to English, or when they're reading English or English reading acquisition. We're going to focus on Spanish for that piece, for obvious reasons. That's where my accent is from, but also because the majority of students in dual language programs usually are native Spanish speakers. And also we work with many schools that have dual language programs where it's Mandarin and English. So we hope this is an engaging conversation, and we hope you interrupt us, ask questions, challenge us, and engage with us. And if we don't know the answer, we'll just tell you that we'll get back to you. So there's plenty of reading research, and I'm quoting here our friend Claude Goldenberg, that establishes that the foundation for learning to read is the same whether you're learning to read in a language you are learning to speak, which is the case of multilingual learners, or you already know that language you're learning to read. You know how to speak it, you have been listening to that language since birth and whatnot. So the foundation for learning to read is the same. The goal is fluent, meaningful reading. The best way to teach is through direct, explicit instruction. To teach reading, you teach phonemic awareness, letter knowledge. We work on word recognition, text fluency. We model comprehension strategies. We work heavily and purposely on oral language development, and that starts way before you start teaching to read. And we're always looking to build and develop knowledge and vocabulary. And the activities that are included to teach reading to multilingual learners are the same than for all other learners. We work on writing letters, sounding out and reading words, on spelling dictations, reading and rereading decodable text, using and modeling comprehension strategies, working with a lot of read alouds to immerse students in that vocabulary building and knowledge building, especially as they're learning to read and they cannot do all that learning through their own reading. So that's the first main concept. It is the same, but it's not identical. So what Claude Goldenberg says is language learners require additional supports. This doesn't mean that it's one or the other, right? And, I feel we live in a very black or white world, and really that reality is a lot more complex. See everything I just mentioned. Those practices are the same. The practices to reading effectively are the same, but they're not identical because language learners need additional supports, especially language supports. And those would include clarify words and content with visuals, with gestures, with expressions, maybe highlighting and illustrating key vocabulary, or pre-teaching it if you're about to read connected text, instruction in English language or English language development, and retelling and discussion of stories. It's that oral language development that also has to be, you have to spend time doing. But it's not one or the other. We're not sacrificing one for the sake of the other. That's the most important concept. So classroom and intervention studies support these conclusions. And this is the first big idea that I hope you all take from this conversation. This is just a list of all those wonderful research-based practices for teaching reading that we are all so familiar with, especially if you're in this group organized by the Reading League. But notice that I am not putting more emphasis to one or the other. It's the same than looking at the rope. One side of the rope is not more important than the other. Both have to happen simultaneously at the same time. And this is especially important for English learners or multilingual learners, because if you sacrifice one of the strands, they will be impacted the most. So that's the goal of that slide. The second thing we want to leave you with in terms of the research is Erica's going to share with you this YouTube video. It's a presentation made by Julie Sparser-Brown. She's a wonderful researcher from the Portland State University. And she did this presentation in the context of a seminar at the Haskins literally have. Okay, so my English learner conditions today, I have a big accent and I'm tripping. But so Julie Sparser-Brown in this presentation was very clear in developing some of the things we just summarized from Claude Goldenberg. And we want you to have the opportunity to watch the entire presentation. It's probably an hour or more. And to prep you for that, there's 4 topics that she raises and treats and deals with some detail that I think are very important. One is that English language learners don't all look the same. Some are born in the US, some are recent immigrants. And this has implications for your instruction and for the supports they're going to need in the classroom. The second one is that the acquisition of social language is very different than the acquisition of academic language. When they're learning English, it's very different, and the process is going to be different if they're learning to speak in English and read in English for social purposes or for academic purposes. The third topic she deals with is assessments and the importance of assessing in the native language, assessing in English, progress monitoring, and I'll review it very briefly. And finally, the importance of using effective instructional strategies. And again, not sacrificing any of those sides of the strand, not sacrificing any of those things that we described, by really having a comprehensive instruction plan. So I really do invite you to consider spending some time with this YouTube video because it is interesting. But the first topic is the fact that all English language learners are very different from each other. So some come to school with some English skills, some come to school with no English skills at all. Some were born in the US and they were immersed in their native language and English language simultaneously. Some are sequential learners. And this has enormous implications for your instruction. Erica's going to share with you a link of a resource that I actually learned about it from the Reading League in one of the summits, where US teachers can have a little preview of what those native languages, what are the fundamentals of those languages, because those will give you hints on the type of supports the students are going to need. But again, your diverse classrooms may have many different native languages and many different types of multilingual learners. The other interesting fact about the second topic that I think is so important that she deals with is that the acquisition of social language can be mastered in 1 to 3 years. So learning English for a native Spanish speaker when they join school socially can take 1 to 3 years. But learning academic English, which is so critical for the stage of learning, reading to learn, can take 4 to 7 years. So you see here, there's a huge difference, and that has a lot of implications on how you're going to look at those students, the supports you're going to provide, how you're going to assess them, and so on and so forth. The other 2 points that she made about this topic that I wanted to share with you today is one, that students that are English learners or multilingual learners with special needs, language-based learning disabilities, for example, can take much longer than that to master academic language. So that is also a very important consideration, especially at the time of designing your tier 2, your tier 3 interventions. Understanding where your students are coming from and the needs they're going to have is very important. And of course, understanding the language and the culture of your students and giving instruction that is culturally responsive will help with engagement, will help with establishing a trust with your students and the fact that they feel appreciated in the learning process. The other point that she made, and I won't go deeply into this, is that, again, as Claude said, it's the same. Learning to read goes through the same processes, the same things are needed. So we need to explicitly teach those 5 pillars of literacy. But, and this is her plus framework, we have to pre-teach critical vocabulary. We have to prime background knowledge. We have to model language. We have to build oral language. We have to be very systematic, and that's where a sequence in a structured literacy type of program or planning will be very helpful. And we have to be strategic to use the native language, to leverage that when appropriate, to help the students master the language they're learning to read and write, speak and write at the same time. So these are all very important considerations, which are probably enough material for a 2-day course. So, and then finally, her fourth topic that I wanted to bring up in this conversation is that how we assess the students is incredibly important. So multilingual learners need to be screened, and if available, if the tool is available, screened in their native language as well, because it's very easy to misdiagnose issues of language-based issues just because sometimes they just don't understand the language. It's not that they cannot do the actual reading. And once we screen and we assess and we identify a problem, then based on the data and analyzing the data, we can then make decisions for intervention that are very targeted and really help you differentiate your instruction to serve that student's needs or that group of students' needs. And then you have to progress monitor. Is my plan, is my intervention working? So this constant cycle of assessment, analyzing data, planning for intervention, and progress monitoring is a must, not for every student really, but especially for multilingual learners, because if issues come up, you want to make sure that you support them and differentiate instruction as soon as possible so that they don't become bigger, they don't snowball. So that was the first big goal I had for today, which is, what does the latest research on English language learners say about how they learn to read and they acquire reading skills? We're going to show you briefly what those practices actually look in the classroom, and Erica's going to walk you through that. We will use PAF and examples for our PAF reading program just as examples, but this applies to any reading program that has uses evidence or incorporates evidence-based practices.
So this slide just shows that it's important that whatever program you use has a systematic sequence of skills, one that begins with the simplest unit of language and gradually becomes more complex. You want to make sure that the skills build upon one another, and it's also important that direct and explicit instruction is used to teach these skills. So as Magdalena mentioned, we're using PAF as the example, but the program that you use, any program you use, should integrate reading, spelling, and handwriting. Students should be reading and spelling the same words in the same lesson because they reinforce one another. And handwriting is the kinesthetic piece that helps students better remember what they're being taught. So in this example, before students are asked to write words with the new sound, they complete a phonemic awareness activity where they have to identify the sound. They then learn how to write the symbol that makes that sound symbol correspondence that's shown there in the middle. They do a phonics activity, which you can see on the right-hand side, and then they move into a spelling dictation and then reading. So here's a sample dictation for the letter R and a word list with the letter R as well.
And as you can tell, we're giving them plenty of opportunities to work on all these very important pillars, but then also we're teaching them spelling rules, which is really about the structure of language. And that, I think, this explicit teaching of spelling rules and the structure of language is critical for multilingual learners. They'll pick up the rules and they will own them and be proud of them and be able to compare them to the rules that they intuitively know from their native language.
And in this example, students then read a story with the same sounds. So the focus shifts to reading for meaning. And this is the time where you can have those rich discussions about the story, no matter how simple the story itself may be. And it's the time for building vocabulary. So setting up multilingual learners for success, and the time for building thinking skills, because the end goal of reading is getting meaning from the text. And it's important to note that the importance of monitored oral reading. During this time, the students aren't reading to themselves. The teacher should be listening to the children read out loud.
And we will show you at the end a video of one of our teachers in New York City, actually, that she is doing a lesson with a group of multilingual learners and how she prepares the lesson, scaffolds certain concepts, gives them feedback as they read and asks them to self-correct. So you'll see that in action.
Yeah, it's such a great sample too. She does such a great job. So on this slide, it's just another example at a higher level with the vowel team EE, and that same routine is used. They're always spelling words with the new sound and previously taught sounds, and then reading a word list to reinforce that. And then there goes the story with the same sounds, and you can see them highlighted there. Okay, so this slide talks about the structure and rules of language. It's important to teach explicitly morphology. When students have an understanding of things such as prefixes and suffixes, it improves their vocabulary. And of course, this benefits all students, but it also acts as that additional language support that benefits English language learners. And it's also important to teach the rules of the English language. Like in the example on the right, students are practicing the silent E rule and learning that rule.
And I think that if you're in a dual immersion program and you're teaching morphology also in Spanish or in the other language that you're co-teaching with English, this concept of understanding the rules and the parts of a word and how they have meaning is something that they will transfer and bring to the acquisition of English.
So you want to make sure that you teach students the rules of syllabication and understanding syllable types, as well as strategies to segment syllables, to spell multisyllabic words, and then apply those skills to read multisyllabic words. And this slide is just showing how in this program, it shows how students apply the newly learned skill on a word list, and then the connected text will also include those words. Here we see in the English language, which I know Magdalena is going to talk a little bit later about some of the differences between English and using Spanish as the example, but in the English language, there are letters or combination of letters that make different sounds. It's important to note that not all these sounds should be taught at once. Rather, students should learn the most common sound to master it, and then later learn the next sound the letter or letter combinations can make.
And this is vowel combinations that make it so difficult for students, for example, that are native Spanish speakers, which is such a transparent language, to acquire those skills in English.
So to reiterate, it's important that in a program, there's repeated practice, multiple exposures, and reinforcement of skills. This will develop automaticity. It's important that there are decodable texts, which forces students to apply word analysis skills. Super important that the program uses monitored oral reading and immediate corrective feedback. And you want to make sure that there are repeated readings, which helps build fluency.
And this is while you're doing the teaching of the actual reading, breaking the code. In addition to that, the constant exposure to knowledge and vocabulary for read alouds is equally important. So Erica, I'm just going to go back to the examples about this slide, because it just talks about identifying and teaching explicitly those areas where comprehension could have certain breakdowns for multilingual learners, because it's just very different from their own language.
Yeah, so using teaching figurative language such as idioms and similes all help increase that comprehension. And I love this example with "You Crack Me Up," where the student draws a picture of someone cracking up, but then you write, it means to make someone laugh. So what the actual meaning of it is. I once told a kid, "Get out of here." I was just joking, and they went to go walk towards the door. So that stuff really does happen in the classroom.
So again, looking for ways to put in front of them, get ahead of all those things that will break comprehension breakdowns, will create comprehension breakdowns for multilingual learners.
And these that Magdalena has up on the screen now are some just great activities for categorization. It's yet another way to build vocabulary and develop oral language, because you're having discussions about these. These are not sheets that are done independently on their own. We're talking about them and why something doesn't belong, for example, in that first one. And then when students are still learning to read, it is super, super crucial to build background knowledge and develop vocabulary through read alouds and in content areas, as this exposes children to higher level vocabulary and more complex story grammar.
Okay, so that was just the second part of this first part of our evening, which is gain some background knowledge on how do multilingual learners learn to read and how those practices look in the classroom. I am going to talk briefly now about what are those skills when you are in dual language programs or transitional bilingual programs, or even as you're thinking about students and their home language, and what are they bringing to the classroom, what can be leveraged during your instruction. These are just things that is important to know on how to support the students. And that's where we said, if you learn a little bit about their native language, it might help you in that instruction and providing those supports. So just very briefly, there was a very important research project by Diane August done in 2002. And the goal of her project was to investigate which of those component skills of reading transfer from one language to the other. And they did this research with cohorts of students that were native Spanish speakers, English only speakers, and they were in different types of programs. And what they concluded is that specifically, and they were testing for this, phonological awareness, word reading, word knowledge, and comprehension, what of those skills transfer from one language to the other. And they concluded that the effect of Spanish phonemic awareness on English phonemic awareness emerged for all students, those that were in formal Spanish dual programs, Spanish-English dual programs, and those that were native Spanish speakers but didn't get formal Spanish reading instruction. They also concluded that the transfer of letter identification and word reading from Spanish to English emerged only for students who had formal reading instruction in Spanish. Again, that academic language or that explicit instruction had a noticeable effect. And then with respect to vocabulary knowledge, students instructed in Spanish knew significantly more cognates than students instructed in English only. And we'll talk about cognates in a little bit, but these are very encouraging findings. Eric is going to share with you 2 more papers that came after the August paper, so that you see that this research continued to be reinforced and expanded. But, and I know you see all of this in your classrooms if you're in dual language programs, but the conclusion is that strengthening Spanish literacy allows them, students, to correctly use their native language, thus improving their bilingual ability, and that findings supported that the practice of providing literacy instruction in Spanish to Spanish-speaking English language learners as a means of helping them acquire literacy skills in English was successful or supported. So as we think about teaching students to read in Spanish so that they can transfer those skills into their English language acquisition and learning to read in English and mastering learning to read in English, we always talk about, okay, what are the things that are the same for both languages? And they will be very easy for you teachers that are in dual language programs to connect and help the students with. Well, first of all, they have the same alphabet, the same Roman alphabet. For students in dual language programs learning Mandarin and English, that looks very different, right? Second of all, 30 to 40% of all words in English have related words in Spanish, the famous cognates, and they're literally the same. So the students will pronounce them differently, but the words are spelled almost the same or the same, and the meaning is the same, which is as important. And this list is a very long list. Here are just a few examples. And then the other big similarity is that learning to read and write uses the same basic processes, right, in both languages. Punctuation is pretty much the same. So, and all the processes for learning to read are the same. So there's a lot of synergies, right? And you can really leverage that native language, or if you're in dual language programs, you're leveraging both as they learn to master both. However, there are many differences. As you all know, Spanish is a very transparent language. It has 5 vowels, and the 5 vowels, those are the 5 vowel sounds you have. In English, to the contrary, you still have the same 5 vowels or graphemes, but in combination and depending on where they are in the word, they can make very different vowel sounds. And for students learning to read in English and to speak English, if they're native Spanish speakers, those vowels will create a lot of trouble. So the more explicit you can be, the better. I should say that you have these slides in the handout that Erica is sharing with you in case these are helpful to you. And if there's anything else you need, you can always ask us. Another big difference is how you pronounce the consonants. And that, I can tell you too, that is a real challenge. So knowing that these differences exist will help you bridge those challenges for your students. Especially in the double L, in the V, the H. It's completely mute in Spanish, but it sounds in a very different way in English. The R, the initial R, and the double R, which is a digraph in Spanish, and so on and so forth. So these are important differences to keep in mind. The other one is that the U is pronounced after the Q in English, like question, but it's not pronounced in Spanish, queso. It's so, again, that creates a lot of reading and pronunciation challenges. Another big challenge is that articles have gender. The nouns have genders in Spanish, and the article changes depending on the gender. And the rule is usually that for the feminine, it's la, and for the masculine, it's el, but not always. None of this happens in English. That would say this is one of the areas where English is a little easier. So that's something else to keep in mind. The order of where the adjective stands in the sentence. Adjectives usually go before the noun in English, but always after the noun in Spanish. So you'll see students reverse that. The wall white instead of the white wall, because they're really just translating in their heads. Similarly, it's with we always need a subject connected to a verb in a sentence, but in Spanish you have a tacit subject, so that creates a lot of issues for using expressive language in English if you're an English learner or writing. Dialogue looks very different. And then this is just a summary of all those differences we just reviewed, but it's just the goal of this is not to be an exhaustive list, but to give you an idea of the challenges your students or the mindset they bring into learning when they've only spoken Spanish until they came to school in kindergarten. And then there's the other differences that are a lot more complex and that usually related to vowel teams, to the consonant digraphs. All of these rules, they just don't exist in Spanish. English is a lot more complex. That's why when you see an instructional sequence in one language, in English, it looks a lot longer than in Spanish. And that is why it's hard to, when you teach side by side, to stay on the same skill in both languages at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. The languages are fundamentally different. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think it just gives you the idea of the differences and then therefore the challenges that they bring for students. In the end, these are the basic differences, and then they translated all the details that we described. But as I said, that resource that Erica is sharing with you, that library of languages, will give you, for how many languages, Erica? 140, I think, for many languages, the basics of the rules of morphology and and other rules of those languages. So then you can study it if you have students that have languages you're not familiar with, briefly, and at least have a back context for where they come from. So before we go to show you the video of our wonderful friend Tina and how she's working with a group of multilingual learners in a school in New York City, I just wanted to see if there were any questions. Okay, well, this teacher, she's about to read the story, that quotable chapter book here that you see on the table with this group of students. And she's anticipating, she's going to kind of bring to life everything we've just discussed. She's going to anticipate the vocabulary the students will not be familiar with. She will anticipate where she'll need to pause and check comprehension. So I think as you see, as we go through the video, you'll recognize all of these skills and the practices that we just described. And I think hopefully it would all come to life as you watch her. And then if you have any questions, we can discuss them at the end. She does a full reading lesson here, so we're not going to do all 12 minutes, I think it is, but we'll watch for at least 3 to 4 minutes because I think it's super, super helpful. Oh, no, that didn't do it. Sorry, guys. I am. Okay, there. Let me know, ladies, if you see it, which I think you don't yet. Okay.
I'm excited. We're going to start our next chapter. And before we read the next chapter, what I would like to do is I want us to read this one sentence that you see over here. Who can read this sentence for me? Let me see. I want to start with John. Go ahead.
Jack has no pet and it looks safe.
Hold on, go ahead a minute. Go back to the sentence again. Go ahead.
I wonder what my issue is.
Sound that out. And put that together. Say ill. Can you read that sentence one more time?
Jack has no pet and it looks
Great job. Keep it going. So thank you for using some expression as you were reading this sentence, and thank you for trying to sound that out. Great job. Well, I want us to take a look at a word in this sentence that we're going to be seeing in our reader today. And the word is pet. Can you say pet? Great. Does anybody know what the word pet means? Anybody know what that word might mean yet? That's a pet, but that's a great guess. The word pet actually means when someone has high energy. Like when you go to gym, you have a lot of pep, right? You're jumping around, you're running around, you're playing around, right? That's pep, to have high energy. A dog can have pep. My dog has a lot of pep. My dog wants to jump on me when she sees me. She wants to play. Have you ever seen a dog with a lot of pep, a lot of energy? Give me a thumbs up if you have. Well, that's what the word pep means. I also want to show you one more word. This word is the word ill. Say ill. Ill. And the word ill means when someone is very sick. Okay? Have you ever been ill before? Raise your hand if you've been ill before. You've been sick before. I've been sick before. Excellent. Okay. So we know that the word pep means a lot of energy. And this is a little picture of a dog that has a lot of pep. That dog looks so happy, right? And looks like it wants to run and play. Now, what about the word, if I say no pep? What do you think that means? Low, high five. Low energy, right? No pep is, if you have low energy, that means you're tired, you're sleepy. If the dog has no pep, the dog is sleeping and tired the whole time, not running around and playing, right? So we're going to see that word today, and we're going to be reading. As we read, if you need a little kind reminder, again, what does it mean again? You're more than welcome to look at the pictures that we have over here. And here's a little picture for ill. Say ill. Someone that's okay. So let's get ready. Open up your book to the next chapter. I'm excited to start this chapter. Now we're getting into reading position, so you know what to do with your index cards. Get them ready. All right, here we go. Who's gonna start reading the title for me? The Vet. Does anybody know what a vet is? Anybody know what a vet is? Yes.
It is where you take
That's right. It's an animal doctor. An animal doctor, just like we go to a doctor when we don't feel good, animals go to a doctor and they call vet. And that's a short way of saying, the long way of saying vet is veterinarian, but the short way of saying is vet. And there's a little picture of an animal doctor, they take care of animals. So I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking, that when we read this chapter, we're probably gonna find out, we'll see, if there's gonna be some animals, I think there's gonna be some animals that might need some help. So let's find out to see what happens, okay? Let's get going. You may be there. She will, hold on for a moment. Who is the vet? Who is the vet?
So I'm going to stop it there because I think the first thing, she spends up to 15 more minutes just actually doing the reading. But you can tell that she really prepped for this story. She anticipated that the students didn't know many of these words that are for two reasons. One, because they're learning English as, to speak English as they're learning to read it, but also because it's controlled language, and the chapter books are very controlled. It's early on in this program. And so she's anticipating that they wouldn't have listened or heard the word PEP even in their everyday life. So she's just paraphrasing it and really using very sophisticated words, high energy or low energy, said the students. So she's elevating the language at the same time that she's kind of teaching the language. She's not making the language simple just because they don't understand it. To the contrary, she's, raising the bar, paraphrasing, giving it to them, but in a very sophisticated way, which I really love about her work. She's not, dumbing it down, as people would say. To the contrary, she's really elevating the conversation. And if you were to watch the entire video, which I'm not sure we have time for, you would see that she continues to do that. She checks on comprehension after every paragraph, and she is always paraphrasing and elevating the conversation so that she can still work on developing oral language skills with this group of students while they're reading a very simple decodable chapter book, just because it's early in their reading instruction. Are there any questions? Great. Wow. I don't know if people would like to see a little bit of the initial reading, or if you want to wrap it up with questions, Jeanette. We're happy to keep going, but
Let's see, does anyone have any questions for Magdalena and
would
Erica?
people like to see more? We can take thumbs up or see what the chat
Someone
says.
in the chat wrote more video. And
Okay.
there's a question from David, it looks like.
Mhm.
So a couple of questions. So we don't have the background on the students, but I don't see that as any different than what it would be to non-ELs. And I assume these are English language learners, because this is that really strikes me as as a level of language that you would have with non-ELLs. And I mean, I know a lot of kids that PEP is not it's not a familiar word to a lot of kids. So I'm just trying to see like where the adaptation or is, what is to be done differently, I guess.
Well, I think that a little bit that is, of course, what's hard about this exercise is that every group of students is different and their needs will be different. In this particular school, the students that are not multilingual learners, we've seen classrooms with them, and maybe that's what I should do next time, David. This takes a lot less time, right? The teacher says PEP is high energy, and they move right on. Here she has visuals. You'll see that as the students start reading, and we can watch a little more, the words and the language even is too new, so they go back to the visual all the time. What was PEP, or what was high energy or low energy? So she's just bringing it to life with more detail and scaffolding more, for sure, than with a group that is not multilingual learners. But again, she's been doing this type of work with everything that, I think she shared this video mid-year of their, I think it's a second grade group. So the students were already a little behind, if you want. Some of them were new arrivals. And so she had been working with them in this manner since the beginning of the school year. So they were getting better and better at it, at the routines and whatnot. And before this, she did a spelling dictation. They read a word list with these words. And now she's really working on meaning and that conversation.
Thank you. And I had one other question that maybe relates more to the first part of what you were talking about.
Yes.
And, that was really helpful what you talked about in terms of where you'd need to supplement and add, particularly given maybe the lack of vocabulary. But in thinking about students with a lot less English fluency, particularly in oral language, I think the burning question I have is what would you do differently if you look at kind of like the science of reading, script or methodology? And the one thing that I keep hitting upon is syllable instruction, which is kind of a cornerstone. But in my experience, when you talk about syllables, and if you also want to talk about phonemes, and again, as I wrote, and I deal with adults, and so you're doing everything kind of compressed. You don't spread it out over a couple of years, but um, I think it's kind of confusing especially if you're talking about chunking words, according to phonemes, and then you want to talk about syllables, and syllables are kind of based on pronunciation as much as they are on spelling. So I'm wondering if that's something that you would, I guess, give or give up in teaching ELLs, especially those that don't really have much English vocabulary at all.
Right. So Spanish, for example, is a language that is traditionally being taught starting at the syllable level, but there's a lot of research, and we can share that with you, that says that actually the smallest unit should be the phoneme, and teaching the students the phoneme and then how to combine it and blend it into a syllable and then blend it into a word is still the best practice. So hopefully, if you're in a dual language program, you'll do that consistently in both, and eventually that blending acquisition of the skill of blending will come together in both languages. I think the syllabication strand, or working with syllabication as a methodology to read unknown words and chunk them in parts so that you can then put them together, and also to identify the parts of a word that have special meaning, like a suffix could be or whatnot. It's still applicable at least in any language that has a Roman alphabet or an alphabet that is similar, just because the words have parts of the word have meaning. That's why morphology is so important. And then blending them to be a unit of meaning is equal. It's the same mechanics, if you want. In the Spanish program that we actually have a syllabication strand, which is different than separating by syllables, right? It's like, and we can get into a rabbit hole in this one. I'm happy to take it offline with you, David, but I guess what I'm saying is you have to understand the languages you're teaching, or the language or languages you're teaching, understand what this is the implication of a syllable and how to bring it all together and bridge it for the students. We found that teaching syllabication in both languages helps the students tackle those long words that are unknown and they don't know how to decode, and then helps them blend them into a meaningful unit, right? And so we kind of abandoned how some Spanish instruction only focuses at the syllable level, because we still think the phoneme is relevant, right? Now, English has only a lot of monosyllabic words, right? You can teach the entire alphabetic code just with one syllable words. That's practically impossible in some languages. Spanish, for example, we have one syllable words that have consonant, vowel, and consonant, and they're closed syllable, the syllable is closed. And other than those, or sometimes they just have two letters, like all the articles and the pronouns. But other than those, every word, the simplest level, has two syllables, like casa and masa, and mama and papa. So, again, it's just all that nuance that having knowledge will help the teachers, bring all of that to life and leverage what they know already in the classroom. And of course, is what makes it so hard, David, right? Expecting everybody to understand all of this when you have students from many different backgrounds and native languages is just really hard.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question, which is a really good one, by the way.
So right now I'm just looking at the time. It is 7:53. We want to thank Magdalena and Erica for joining us tonight. And I have just a few announcements before